I am Brandon Clark. This is my co-host Swal Hall, and today we're meeting on uncommon ground. So happy Fourth to everyone. Late Fourth. It'll be five or so days after for this, but we didn't wish you before, so I'll wish it now. A lot has happened this weekend, including the disastrous, the tragedy, the Texas flooding, leaving people dead. We'll talk about that. The missing children, all that has to come in with that. We'll talk about the big beautiful bill that Trump passed. He signed it on the 4th, I believe. So that's big news. I'm sure that we'll have some differing views there. And then we're going to get into Russia and Ukraine. Always been in the news, obviously, as we hope for peace, but it hasn't been found. Trump and Putin had a phone call that was kind of all in the news because of disagreements. Trump came out publicly like that he couldn't really get along with Putin, and then strikes were launched into Kiev. So we'll talk about all of that. And then we're going to end on a debate on if the nuclear family, the erosion of the nuclear family, is the greatest threat to American democracy. So be sure to stick around for that. It's sure to get spicy. We are going to start with the Texas flooding, where, as always, for things like this, I'd like to say my heart goes out to anyone involved. Thoughts and prayers. It's a really sad thing to see. For the numbers that I had as of when we're recording this, which is a few days before it's released. Right now, the number is 82 dead with dozens missing. I think it's 27 missing. This is children. There's some adult staff workers as well. What happened essentially was heavy rains caused flash flooding. That went over the river down into these towns. And I mean, I'm sure if you've seen the images, it's pretty crazy. Swa, I guess before we dig too deep into it, I'll let you get your thoughts out about it also.
Yeah, I actually hadn't had those updated numbers. I had 78, so it seems like at least four more people unfortunately lost their lives during this. And then I saw out of that, I guess 82, maybe this number is a little off too now. 28 of them were children, which obviously is heartbreaking for people who have a lot of life ahead of them. So yeah, as you said, thoughts and prayers go out to the community that's affected in Kirk County and Camp Mystic and all of that jazz. But yeah, thankfully the rescue efforts, 850 people were rescued. At least those are the numbers that I've got. And Trump did declare that it was a major disaster, and obviously sent in FEMA support and whatnot, which I'm glad happened. And then I'm sure we'll talk about the NWS staff cutting and some of those effects. But yeah, just up top, thoughts and prayers with a disaster like this. It's always just devastating to hear. So
Yeah, and I guess to kind of get into some of that, the mayor of what was it, Kerrville? Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but the mayor came out and said that he actually had not gotten warning beforehand. Typically, when there's rainfalls like this, the NOAA or the National Weather Service, one of the two, is going to reach out to local officials. Him not getting this could speak to the effect of that there has been staffing cuts at the NOAA. Trump and Musk, through Doge, kind of worked on cuts with them, budget cuts with the NWS. The numbers that I have is the NOAA. They plan to cut a few thousand. So far, they've fired a couple hundred. And they've offered, I think it was 800 something voluntary, like severance or early retirement for some people. So they've let go a pretty significant amount. I covered on my main channel a story with a climate. She works with an organization, and she said that they specifically have an opening in the local warning coordination meteorologists. So a lot of this kind of speaks to how actions can have consequences and why we shouldn't be recklessly cutting agencies, because we want to do like tax cuts and stuff when like they really do have purposes that can save lives.
yeah, and piggybacking off of that, we just need to be careful when we're making these cuts to critically evaluate whether the staffing cuts are going to undercut public safety, because obviously that is a role of the government. Even conservatives should support that. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Number one thing there was life. So it is a big part of the government to protect its citizens, and so obviously we want a balanced view. We want to invest in emergency prep and stuff like that. Um, but also, obviously, if there is any wasted money in any of these organizations, obviously, I advocate for smaller governance, and I do want cuts where it makes sense, but not at the expense of life saving infrastructure. So, we could speculate none of us are in these organizations. We don't know if these cuts actually affected. We can make some assumptions. We can make some stuff like that. But I think the important thing moving forward is just to advocate for um, you know responsibility in these local subsidiarities. So local, state, federal, make sure that they're all cooperating and working for the greater good of the communities and make sure people are safe. So
Yeah, and another thing I'd want to mention is it does kind of fly in the face of the one big beautiful bill, with part of it being large FEMA cuts on the federal level, as Trump's stated goal was directing it back to the states to handle these things on their own. But then when this happens, obviously Texas needed federal resources. Trump, rightfully so, moved to direct federal resources to them. But if we're defunding this, which luckily doesn't go into effect until next year, this isn't like we're not going to be as capable to do this for states. So I think it also highlights kind of how dangerous it is for that specifically. And then the last thing that I did want to touch on, and then Swa, you could, if you wanted to piggyback off of that or had anything else to say, is I find it really disappointing when people like Mike Johnson, who in my opinion is a clown, goes on Fox News and he's all saying, what again, rightfully so. He's saying, my heart goes out to them. We'll commit any aid right away. Like he's saying that. He's like, I've already directed anything I can. But when it was LA and there was houses on fire in LA, he came out and was saying, well, I don't know if I can commit aid while people's houses were burning down, drug his feet and getting any aid sent, and then said, well, we're going to need conditions if I send the aid because it's all the liberals' fault. So I just wish that we could have the same level of empathy for all people going through trauma, tragedy, whatever you want to call it, and not be so like partisan with all of it.
yeah, and I would wholeheartedly agree with that. Um, just bringing in my Catholic Catholic perspective for a second, in the Catechism, paragraph 2288 through 89. Catholic teaching heavily emphasizes the protection of life and care for the vulnerable, even in government policy. So that is something that I think more conservatives should be conscientious of and should support. We're all in this together. We all live in this country, this world, this state, all of this together. And so, if when it comes to life saving care, that's where, I don't mince words. Pretty much, I'm whatever resources we need to do to protect people's lives. I'm 1,000% down on that. So yeah, Mike Johnson, poo poo you for that. Those comments, that sucks. Definitely, if people's houses are burning down, we need to do what we can to help out in that situation as well. So
And
yeah,
yeah, I actually did just think of this, and I'm sure we'll agree here also. But I did want to at least say it. A lot of this is a failure of infrastructure. Updated infrastructure wouldn't allow for this if we had it like to the levels of how we know climate change is making natural disasters a lot worse. Biden specifically in his bipartisan infrastructure bill, there was like $8 or $9 billion specifically directed at floods of this nature for rivers that can't handle heavy rains where flash floods would spill over. So I think that this is something that should continue. I think Republicans, I would urge Trump to focus on passing an infrastructure bill. And in his first term, he said it was infrastructure week every week and never passed anything on infrastructure. So maybe he could bring it back and actually pass something. But it also, I think, speaks to the importance of, however unpolitically, like unsexy it is politically, like, oh, infrastructure, who cares, it is important to actually like saving everyday lives.
well, and then the funny thing is, like on the conservative side, and I've never been one of these climate denialist. I'm more of a, it's definitely happening. I'm open to what level of damage it's going to do and what level of our involvement. The finer details, I've not taken any hard stances on, but to deny climate change is just kind of insane. But on the right hand side, a lot of the view is always, well, humans are good at adapting. That's what we do. We build skyscrapers, we build air conditioning so we don't have to live in the heat, yada yada yada. And seawalls. The amount of times I've heard people talk about seawalls and stuff like that. But then, yeah, when it comes to actually passing any infrastructure, oh, the deficit, yada yada, this, that, or the other. So consistency, my Republican friends. If we're saying humans can adapt and, oh, we don't need to have the I forget what the Green New Deal or whatever. We don't need to do anything crazy like that because we can just ingenuity. We can just get through it. Okay, then pony up the cash. Let's build seawalls. Let's get ahead of these things and actually terraform or whatever we got to do. So yeah, I would urge support in that direction as well.
Yeah, and then I mean, so not the best segue, but somewhat of a segue. What Trump is ignoring infrastructure for is things like the one big beautiful bill, doing more tax cuts. I'll let you jump in pretty early on this one, Swall, just because I know that like everything I'll have to say about this is negative, and I'm sure you probably at least have some positives about it. But yeah, just for setting the bases, it's pretty costly. I think the overall cost is $4 to $5 trillion. There's debt reduction measures in the bill as well. So what it adds to our debt and deficit is around $3.5 trillion. So yeah, Swall from there, jump in. That spending wise, it's
Yeah.
mostly tax cuts. There's military spending, that stuff. Let us know what you think, because then I'm coming in with the negativity.
Yeah. So like you said, I mean, the bill passed very narrowly. I want to say it was like 214 to 218 or something very
Mm.
close like that, with a few GOP defectors, if you want to call them that. So there's a lot of debate over this bill. It's been all over the media. It's got cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, clean energy programs, along with tax breaks for higher income households. One thing that I saw is that it defunded, or at least significantly defunded, and took funds from Planned Parenthood. Obviously, super excited about that. That's very awesome from my perspective. But interestingly enough, the U.S. Conference of Bishops and the Vatican have been fighting with Trump administration again over this bill. Seems to be a reoccurring theme this administration. But
Those woke
Archbishop
bishops.
Yes, yes. Archbishop Broglio called the legislation's social safety net cuts unconscionable, and warned that it takes from the poor and gives to the wealthy. The bishops praised pro family and life affirming provisions, which is kind of like I said, Planned Parenthood, abortion funding limits, but urged that Congress needs to be creative and courageous in protecting the vulnerable. And so I'm always going to defer to my bishops and to the people who have greater wisdom in the church. And so I kind of align that obviously I support fiscal responsibility, but not at the expense of the poor. And obviously, Catholic social teaching demands preferential treatment for those in need, which is in the catechism. So I agree that some of the reforms were necessary, but I echo what the bishops say, that there's a lot of moral failings in this bill. And basically, to sum it all up, we can be pro market and we can be pro life, but we can't be pro exploitation, which I'm afraid that this bill is tiptoeing into a little bit. So definitely a pro life win, but there's a lot of moral issues here. So those are kind of my thoughts, Brandon.
Yeah, I
Destroy them.
think, yeah, here to kill your happiness, Swall. No, I mean, we don't disagree too much on it, but I do think it's probably more of an anti-woman win than a pro-life win, in that Planned Parenthood doesn't do abortions as like a majority service. They do like STD checks, breast cancer screenings, these type of things, and they don't use federal money for that. But we don't have to get caught up on Planned Parenthood, because again, I have a lot that I don't like about this bill. One, something that I don't think is getting talked about enough is the things Trump ran on this bill were no tax on tips, no tax on overtime, no tax on Social Security. The Social Security isn't in there. For overtime and tips, it's not a tax cut, it's a tax credit. So you're not getting more money on your paychecks, but you can claim it when you file your taxes, and you're either going to have to, pay less, or you'll make, most people, aren't paying taxes at that point, or at the end of the year aren't having to pay taxes on their return. They're probably getting money back, but it's something you'll get at the end of the year rather than on every paycheck. It phases out green energy tax incentives. It phases out a lot of the infrastructure funds for different projects that Biden had in his infrastructure bill. It cancels the SAVE plan for student loan payments. People who are living below the poverty level line, who make less than $10,000 a year, now will have to make monthly payments on their student debt, which I think is insane, to make people living in abject poverty have more of a financial burden. It represents the largest Medicaid cut in American history. Over 10 million people are projected to lose their health care from this. And another part, not getting talked about as much as the fact that people are getting pulled off of healthcare, is that even those keeping their healthcare, there are millions now that will have additional associated costs. Medicaid is for, obviously, for those who don't know, for like the lowest income earners. Some seniors are on there, and then a lot of children. So people who are on Medicaid typically don't have payments. Now some medicines won't be covered by Medicaid because they're limiting what they're giving to providers, and certain treatments won't be as well. So now these people have to come out of pocket for that. It defunds food stamps to the point that millions won't be on that service as well. There's thousands of schools that use this to do a free school lunch program. Those schools will not be able to do this anymore. And then from different economic analysis, the bottom 20%, because of these cuts, are actually projected to lose 3% of household income. It's net even for the 20 to 40% range. And then most benefits are going to those making over $200,000 a year. There's cuts to things like we talked about, like FEMA, the NOAA, the National Weather Service, federal endowments for research is getting cut, USAID, the Lancet. This is a pretty credible journal for medical research and data. They found that these USAID cuts by 2030 could cost over 10 million lives. And then the last thing I'll say, because I know I've given a novel, multiple budget models from the Right Wing Tax Foundation to the Yale Budget Lab all predict at or under 1% economic growth over the next decade from this bill. So it's like we're stealing from the rich to give to the poor, and we're not even spurning the economy. 1%, for anyone who's not aware, is dog shit.
Nice. um, yeah, like I said, I'm not gonna disagree with too much of what you're critiquing and what you're saying. I do have my own thoughts, and perhaps it'll be one of our debates sometime about the welfare system and kind of a better model. But I do think that, generally speaking, the social safety net needs to exist in some capacity, and that taking from that and putting people's lives, or at least quality of life, even in jeopardy, is not something that we should take lightly. And like I said, I'm all good for fiscal reform. There's cuts need to happen. I understand all of that, but we need guardrails for the poor, the disabled, families. The least of these, to quote Jesus. And we need to stick up for human dignity and all of that good stuff. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the fallout like this is from, or is like, I should say, um, and what benefits, if any. You say 1%. Will we even be able to feel that if it is a 1%? Will there be anything that we can tell from it, or will it kind of be uh, much ado about nothing for no reason, and nothing big comes from it, and we spend all these trillions for no reason?
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't have much else to add on that, but
I do. I have a couple questions. I do want to point out that, just for anyone wondering what one, like, and I do understand, like, the predictions is it adds 1% to like whatever the GDP that he would normally have is. But like the year after the recession, Obama's first year in 2009, he had like 2% GDP. So like
right.
now it's recovering from a recession. So like if you could imagine like 1%, that's it's not feelable, right? But what do you think of ICE? And I don't remember the number. I knew I should have wrote it down, but I didn't. I think it's 50 something billion, but it also, I could have it backwards and it could be 80 something billion, somewhere between 50, tens of billions of dollars to ICE. They're funding ICE to an amount that is larger than some countries do their entire military. And then obviously with what we've seen going on in like California with ICE, what are your thoughts with that specifically?
Yeah, we've touched on it before. Immigration is a very difficult subject for me to wrap my head around and really have a strong stance on, because I see so many good points on both sides. Um, so just vaguely in a vacuum, I don't have a problem with funding government organizations or funding ICE. Um, Now, the moral steps that ICE has been taking is more of where my issues are going to lie, and what are they going to do when they have more funding? Or maybe we can look at it optimistically, maybe more funding, better training, better hiring, better whatever. Maybe we don't have so many crazy stuff happening. So I don't know. Like I said, I don't. It's hard for me with immigration because on one hand, we got to protect our country. Every country should be able to control immigration to some degree. How many people are coming in at what level? What kind of quality of people? You know, we don't want a bunch of criminals moving here or anything like that. But at the same time, the world is for all of us. So I understand this. What is even borders? And I don't know.
I,
Immigration is a weird subject for me.
I do want to point out that you did say that you care about fiscal responsibility. And then the very next question you answered saying you don't care if ICE is funded more than some other countries' militaries. Like,
Well, yeah, but we're a super rich country. We
in
have
what
more
way
money
would
than
that be?
every other country.
So
So
this is
it's
my
all
thing.
in perspective.
This is my contention, and I am of like in full disclosure, I don't think ICE should exist at all. But
Sure.
and I think that we should have an enforcement mechanism for the border, to be clear, and for immigration. I just think when we already have DHS like for the border specifically, and then we have like local law enforcement agencies, we already have I mean just different we have so many different agencies that exist to do these things, that why would we need ICE, which often acts more as like a partisan political police force, like you see with Trump walking ICE through the streets of LA. I don't think that's needed, and I don't think we need to give more money to something that exists solely to just do that, or that can just be used at that discretion. So I just don't understand how it could be responsible when you're already seeing at this funding level how it's being misused. And there's not a lot of benefit we receive from ICE, right? Like 43% of detainees from ICE don't even have a criminal record. So it's like not even like they're just getting violent criminals. They're picking up a lot of people who don't have and of the people after outside of that 43%, there's a significant portion to where their only criminal record is traffic violations. So like they're not getting like the hardened criminals. So I just don't get how it could be responsible to fund them to the tune of, even if it is just 50 billion, but upwards of, if it's 60, 70 billion, whatever.
Yeah, starting with the financial thing, obviously it's all in perspective. If I go and buy, the brand new Tesla or whatever and lease it or whatever for 130K and my monthly payments 5K, then yeah, that's irresponsible. If Bill Gates goes and buys that same Tesla, it's like he bought a loaf of bread. So comparing it to other
Well,
countries, depending on the difference of our GDP and our money versus what percentage. I would be curious on what percentage
yeah.
spent
So
comparison rather than a number value.
I just want to clarify though. It's more, I think more of the irresponsibility is that it's money better spent elsewhere, not necessarily the scale itself.
Sure, sure, sure. And I was about to get to that next. Is I hear you with we've got CIA, FBI, local police, state troopers. I'm sure that there's
DHS,
a
yeah.
few that I'm forgetting
Homeland
that are
Security, yeah.
Homeland Security, and perhaps we could streamline and maybe just have like three of those guys or something.
Mhm.
Uh, but that's almost somewhat of a separate conversation because then we're just talking about major restructurings of the way that the government functions in enforcement, and we
Not
could talk
really.
about that, and I could be down for that. Um, like I said, to cut back on those, but with the ones that we have, just on its surface, just saying an organization that we have that does this thing, we're going to supply with
Well,
such and such amount, doesn't
so
necessarily bother me, but
I do have one contention with that. And just on the
yeah.
history of ICE, like ICE was created in, I think, 2003, because I think Homeland Security was 2002 and then ICE was 2003. They were
Mm-hmm.
both created largely in response to 9/11. So like we operated as a country for far longer without ICE than we have with ICE.
Sure.
So it's not like they serve some critical role that like only they can do and that we don't know how to do without them.
No, and like I said, I would agree with that. It's totally fine. I'm not a ice extremist. Like I'm
Yeah.
not some guy who's like, we need ice, we
Yeah.
need them.
Yeah.
Um, but like I said, I'm not an immigration expert. I don't know how many other responsibilities these other organizations have to where I don't know what the rationale behind ICE was and how valid or invalid it is to begin with. So I would have to take a few steps back and do more research before I would just say any money spent on ICE is a waste. Maybe,
Well,
but I wouldn't really know.
this is the only, and we'll move on after this, but this is the only thing I'll say is that it was a decision made with the same rationale for the same reason by the same guy who justified us going into Iraq.
Sure.
I think that's all you need to know, brother. No, but if you don't have anything else on the one big beautiful bill, we could go on to Russia, Putin, Trump stuff.
Yeah, let's hit it.
All right. Yeah. So it started, there was a big phone call between Trump and Putin. They have been kind of, they're usually friends, friendly guys, and it seems they've been drifting apart a bit as peace hasn't been gettable in the region. And there was a recent phone call, I think maybe a week or so ago, maybe a little even recent. Sooner than that, where Trump, after it announced that Putin pretty much told him he wasn't going to back down from Ukraine, Trump came out when he was getting on a plane and was like, outright, I don't think Putin wants to stop. And that's pretty significant, as Trump is usually the guy who boasted, I can get peace on day one, it'll be easy and all of this. So
Right.
that's a significant 180 on its own. But then also hours following that, Putin launched it's the record, the largest drone strikes in terms of amount of drones into Kiev that that Russia has into Kiev. So that's pretty significant as well. And that also comes on that phone call. Trump had told Putin that he was going to stop missile defense, air missile defense shipments to Ukraine. And he told him that without getting a concession from Putin for peace or anything, apparently hoping it would just make him peaceful. Didn't really work that way. So Swa, what are your thoughts on that? And just kind of where we're at, and then we'll get into maybe the negotiation tactics here.
Yeah, the Russia Ukraine thing has been one of the more frustrating things to witness over the last, how long now? Like 10 years, 5, 10 years
Yep.
since it like started.
11, yeah.
Yeah, it's been disappointing, to quote Trump, to see Putin's unwillingness to back down from Ukraine.
Yeah.
And I totally understand and empathize with Zelensky and Ukraine not wanting to give up. Obviously, there's been conversations from people here in America, just lay people, talking about, you know, Zelensky needs to know when to give up, yada yada yada. But I think it's important to to talk about supporting people who are oppressed and being, I mean, their land is literally being stolen, their country is literally being, you know, stolen and oppressed. So I still think that it is right and just for the U.S. to support this war effort from Ukraine's side. um, Going to our debate last year talking about just war, I think that on our side and on Ukraine's side, obviously defending innocent life and sovereignty and stuff, it definitely checks the boxes, and this
Mhm.
is a just fight to be a part of. But yeah, I am kind of at a loss for how we're going to move forward without some sort of escalation on our side with Ukraine, because I just don't think Putin. I mean, why would he stop? Essentially,
Yeah.
you know, like what
And
have we really brought to the table to say, let's make a deal? Like what deal? Because he's not going to give up his positions. He has no
mhm.
intention of doing that.
And
Um,
I do want to get there and talk about that, but I did want to ask you first, do you think that this is with Trump, telling Putin that he was going to pull back the air defense missile shipments without getting a concession, kind of publicly admitting, hey, I don't think Putin wants peace. Do you think he's trying to like slow walk us out of involvement, or do you think that this is him turning tides and maybe he'll want to get more involved? Like, what do you think he's signaling with
yeah,
his actions?
I mean, I know that he talked about a follow up call with Zelensky, so we'll see what comes from that. But yeah, I'm not sure really what his plan or aim is, because you know, he said he was disappointed in Putin's unwillingness. So it does seem like his desired outcome, obviously, of course, why wouldn't it be, is for Putin to stop and
Yeah.
to back down. So I'm not sure that giving up is on his radar quite yet. Um, but I'm not sure if he's willing to do anything more than just financially support. And I'm not sure on the world stage how all of that would be perceived. You know, can U.S. put boots on the ground? What's going to happen if that happens? So, like, you know, the escalation there. Like, what more can we do? So, but I don't want isolated neutrality. I don't want us to just remove ourselves from the equation and let the innocent suffer and just be like, oh, sorry, we wash our hands of this. It's got nothing to do with us anymore. We told you, you know, time expired. Sorry, Zelensky. Like, that would be insane. So
And we
I
tried
hope
that
Trump
already.
doesn't do that.
we
Yeah,
tried that in World War II and Pearl Harbor happened and we got
right.
stuck into war anyway. So why try it
Exactly.
again? It's people who haven't read a history book. That's what I always say on my channel. You shouldn't let them dictate foreign policy. Uh, one more thing I did want to note is that there is reporting in Ukraine. It hasn't been confirmed from U.S. intelligence, but the reporting on the ground from Ukrainian intelligence is that some of these munitions came from China, possibly, which also adds
Yeah.
another element to kind of the
Well,
scariness of how this could be escalating, which seems to me like maybe these countries smell blood in the water. Like they know Trump either doesn't really have the strongest strategic chops in terms of military and geopolitics, or that they think that he doesn't want to get involved to the point that they can just do whatever they want.
yeah, I hadn't heard about that China thing. That does throw a whole nother angle to approach this whole at.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, at the end of the day, I just think we're gonna have to strong arm. We're gonna have to show a little bit of toughness in this situation to get
Yeah.
Putin to
I
back
agree.
down.
Mhm.
Whether that's, I don't know what we can supply Zelensky's people with, but I'm not opposed, and I'm not ever a guy who's like, let's go to war. I'm not opposed to getting involved on that level. Granted, like I said, I don't really know all of the geopolitical. Maybe we can't do that. I don't really know, but I think Putin needs to be put in his place, and it's about time to end this.
I completely agree with you. And I think if anything, and this is the last thing I'll say, but the projection of unity went a long way. Like there was no strikes like this while Biden was in office. Like obviously there was the original invasion, but that kind of came when there's still like the transitional period. Biden was first in office, but like once the war had started and it was clear Biden had made it like clear in public, we will stand with Ukraine, there wasn't large attacks like this. There were ones of various sizes, but this is a record size strike from the 11-year conflict. This is the largest drone strike that has happened. And I think it speaks to, we just switched from projecting complete unity, a president who said we will stand with Ukraine no matter what, to now a president who's like blaming Ukraine. He said that they're like the ones who didn't want peace, who's saying, who knows if we're gonna like help them if they don't come to the table. And I think it shows geopolitically how that's not the best strategy. But
Yeah, I don't have much to add on that.
yeah.
Could be right, could be wrong. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, and then so yeah, if that's all, we'll hop over to the debate. The prompt that we're debating is eroding the nuclear family the greatest threat to American democracy? My case is really short, so I guess I'll go first.
Sure.
I don't think it's a threat at all, let alone the greatest threat. And I think even if there is like some hypothetical threat you could convince me of, there's so many other things that pose a greater threat that like greater is, I think there's such a big burden on you for choosing this prompt, like corporate money, fascism, bigotry, propaganda. I would say all of those pose a bigger threat to American democracy. I don't even know if I would think the nuclear family is eroding or what you would even mean by that, but I am interested to hear. So go ahead. Why is it the greatest threat?
Sure. I wrote a little, it's like 45-second opening thing
Mhm.
to basically give my view. So, the erosion of the nuclear family is the greatest threat to American democracy because the family is where citizens are formed. When you destroy the institution that teaches responsibility, moral order, delayed gratification, trust, and all of those virtues, you destroy the virtues necessary to sustain a free society. Single parent homes now account for 1 in 4 U.S. families, and with that rise comes increased crime, higher welfare dependency, lower civic participation, and crumbling trust in democratic institutions. When the family fails, the state expands to fill the void, and that is how liberty dies. If we want to save the republic, we have to rebuild the family. So essentially, I have a bunch of bullet points and other stuff that we'll discuss, I'm sure, but my argument is essentially all those things that you just talked about come from people being poorly formed by growing up horribly, whatever their situation may be, and the overall arcing foundation of society being rotten so that it trickles down or trickles up, however you want to look at it, to lead to things like young men wanting to have some direction in their life and wanting structure and becoming fascist or fascistic because they didn't have a dad at home to raise them. And so they fall into like a we don't have Hitler Youth or anything, but like a Hitler Youth type of thing, or neo Nazis or whatever. And so it all stems from the family and really how their lives began. So that's kind of my argument.
Does that, do you think that that started this year, or do you think that this has been a
Oh
long
no,
problem?
yeah, oh, long problem for sure. So,
Okay,
um,
so then my first contention would be that it's not a bigger threat than fascism, because prior to this year, when Donald Trump came into office, people shared all of the same democratic privileges. We had perfectly fine trust in our institutions in terms of polling. We were working pretty strong in terms of like a democratic society. And then Donald Trump came in, well, started campaigning, I would say, and ran on, well, the election was stolen. All of the media is lying to me. None of the courts can be trusted. And we've seen since then, now trust in our institutions plummet. We've seen him come into office to where me and you, at least in other podcast episodes, have agreed that he's a fascist. I think he clearly meets the 14 tenets of fascism. Fascism is hinged as a movement, hinged on suppressing democratic power. And we've seen that democratic power be suppressed, right? In multiple ways. I mean, I could list them, but I think it's pretty self-evident. And I think that that is clearly a greater threat in just the difference we've seen in, what is it, 6 months that a fascist has had power of our government.
yeah. So first off, like most of the things that you listed there didn't happen this January. They, if we're even crediting those to Trump, they definitely happened in 2016. So like 9 years ago, almost a decade ago. Definitely not.
What are you talking
It's not
about?
like not trusting institutions. That's not like in the last 6 months. That's, or else January 6th would have never happened.
No, it
That's
wasn't
like
really a
years
mass.
ago.
Yeah, it wasn't a mass problem until he lost the election. And then,
Yeah, but
and
that's
either
not
way,
this year. That's
right.
5 years
Well,
ago. It's half a decade ago.
sure, but the point stands that it's a, that is from fascism, and those are effects that you could directly contribute to fascism, of which I think greatly outweigh anything you could point to that's material or immaterial from the nuclear family
Yeah, but you
erosion.
don't not trust your institutions because you're a fascist. Those two things have that. There's no connection there at
No,
all.
you
You
don't
don't
trust
trust your
institutions
institutions.
because of fascists, like who are in power, who
Yeah,
are,
but you don't fall for fascists if you're an upstanding citizen who has morals and is raised right, and then you don't fall for
that's
fascists because you
that's
were
not true.
raised correctly.
That's
Um,
not true. You think everyone who believes Donald Trump wasn't raised correctly? 77 million people voted for him.
yeah, to some degree, or at
Okay.
least maybe not raised from
Okay. And you
when,
think all of them were raised in a non-nuclear family, to be clear.
not
77.
necessarily. Let me go into some of my stats and some of my info here to give a better picture. So, for instance, I think a lot of people vote for populists when they are desperate. And I think a lot of people are desperate because they're in bad financial situations. So, here's an interesting stat: 90% of children formed from married parent homes avoid poverty. In a single parent home, that drops to 22%. 22%.
Right.
So,
I don't care about really any of this. Like, Trump does really well with affluent voters, not educated voters, but wealthy voters, right? Like the Republican Party traditionally carries those voters. His largest donors were wealthy. He makes up the, in terms of wealthy donors, he makes up most of them. So like it's not like poverty created Donald Trump voters, and you would obviously concede, of the 77 million people who voted for Donald Trump, they didn't all just come from eroded nuclear families. So that's a problem that,
well,
one, the nuclear family doesn't fix, and two, you can't say comes from the erosion of the nuclear family, and it is directly tied to fascism.
Well, the problem there is it's not simply, oh, that person came from, but they live in a society that has eroded nuclear families. So there, it's not just a one to one from your specific kid or that specific kid grew up in a certain way. Even if you grew up in a nuclear family and you go to school where
That
half
sounds
of the
like
kids are
solely intuitive to me, right? Like, is there a way to falsify that?
to falsify which specific statement.
That society is causing the erosion of the nuclear. I don't even know the point you're trying to get to. Is really the erosion of the nuclear family in society is breeding Trump voters, even if they're in a nuclear family, even if they come from a good nuclear family and were raised well, that the society's erosion of the nuclear family still led them to be a Trump voter. That sounds like an unfalsifiable statement, which makes it
It,
like entirely intuitive or
essentially, what I'm
conspiratorial.
trying to argue is there are certain conditions. Tell me if you agree with this. There are certain conditions that allow for the rise of a figure like Trump better than other circumstances. Would you agree with that?
I mean, that's really broad and vague. I would agree
Certain
with it.
social
Like, I would
circumstances,
agree with it, but I would think we would probably disagree on those conditions.
sure, but
Like, I would
at
think
least so you can understand.
religion is a big one of those, and I don't think you would.
Sure, and at least we agree conceptually that that's a thing. That's essentially where I'm trying to come from. Is I think that there are conditions that began with the erosion of the family, or at least in part began there, that
Mhm.
allowed for a scenario like we see today. Um, so, for instance, we know that less family stability equals less civic engagement. So you're not even having as many people, if they're not coming from stable homes, likely to vote or volunteer or trust elections or be involved in democracy. And so if you don't have people who actually care about voting, and the only who care about these issues, or they feel discouraged, none of these things are ever going to happen, so I'm just not going to vote. The amount of times I've heard people in our age range say they're not even going to vote because both candidates suck or whatever. It's creating an environment where people don't even want to be involved is a threat to democracy.
Yeah, so
Um,
my contention with that specifically is that Trump overwhelmingly carried the religious vote. And we just had a debate where you spewed a bunch of facts to me or statistics to me about how religious people come from two-parent, affluent, wealthy households, educated, all of this, stable households, but they still overwhelmingly fell for the propaganda, fell for the fascism, and voted for the fascists. So again, I don't think that these are things you can like intuitively attribute to the erosion of society, even or erosion of the nuclear family in society, so much so that even when you come from a nuclear family, you still might feel these effects. I think it's clearly the effects of fascism and propaganda which stand to erode democracy. And I don't know if the nuclear family really plays into that at all. And I
yeah,
feel like
like I go ahead.
I was just going to say last thing is I just feel like it's an unfalsifiable statement, which would make it a conspiracy theory.
Well, first off, I don't know that maybe that makes sense. An unfalsifiable statement equals a conspiracy theory. Maybe. I don't know that I would say that. And to be perfectly clear, let's not pretend like a conspiracy theory means that something is false. That's not even true either. So, um, and just because something's unfalsifiable doesn't mean it's false. But
Okay, I disagree
basic.
with all of those statements that you just said. That's an insane bit to just drop. Oh, okay, you don't wait. Hold on. We're not gonna go. Go ahead. I don't want to derail this
What do
debate.
you mean that's an insane bit? Obviously, an unfalsifiable statement doesn't mean that it's false inherently. That doesn't make sense.
You
How would
don't
that
trust
follow?
falsifiability. How do you prove the validity of an unfalsifiable statement?
That's not.
How do you
I'm not talking
test the
about proving
validity of
anything.
it?
I'm saying it doesn't make it false.
You
That
can't
just doesn't
test it.
follow.
It's
That
unprovable.
doesn't matter. It
Right.
might be unprovable, but
So
it doesn't
you
make it
can't give it
false.
the value of true or false, right? If you can't prove it to be either. So falsifiability is really important. But we don't have to derail too much, but falsifiability, like, do you hold on, like, do you value like the scientific method?
Of course, I value the
Okay,
scientific
well, like
method.
falsifiability is like key to that.
Yeah. Well, I'm not talking about science, so I don't know what that really has to do.
Well, the scientific method is just a means to come to like provisional truth. And it's like falsifiability is like
Yeah,
key.
let's take a claim, for instance, God exists. That's an
Yeah,
unfalsifiable claim.
exactly. And that's a major
But
problem
it
with
does
religion.
but that cannot ever mean logically, therefore, because it's an unfalsifiable claim, therefore God does not exist. That would be fallacious. That doesn't make sense. You
It
cannot
means
say
it
he
means it's
doesn't.
illogical to believe in.
It the best you can do is say, um,
We are getting away from the
yes,
topic. Maybe
yes,
this would
yes,
make a good debate to do.
yes,
I would
sure.
think that would make it illogical to believe in because there's no way to validate it. And if you're believing things that are inherently unvalid or that unvalidatable isn't a word, but that you can't validate, I think it's illogical. But
Yeah, but that would be to pretend that evidence can't be convincing. For instance, I might have, let's just make up a number, 25 amazing pieces of evidence
right.
for in favor of the premise that God exists, and then it would be reasonable because I have reasons. I literally have reasons, so it's reasonable to believe, but it's unfalsifiable. Anyways,
Yeah, I totally
kind of where were
disagree.
we on before that?
I
derailment.
I mean, my biggest point is that yeah, erosion of the nuclear family. I didn't think you could attribute it to the things of like voters for Donald Trump because he carried the religious vote. Rich people voted for Donald Trump, so people who don't directly suffer from this.
Let me ask you this: do you think a large portion of people voted for Donald Trump because they felt when he went out and said whatever he said that they felt seen, heard, spoken for, like somebody was actually sticking up for them, essentially?
I think the only people who felt that way are bigots, like people who are racist. I think more so, most people fell for the propaganda, especially this time around. I think maybe
Which propaganda are you talking about specifically?
I mean, different pieces of propaganda for different coalitions. Some people, I'm sure a lot of the religious voters could have fell for, Democrats want to do third trimester abortions and kill babies after birth. Some people might have fell for Democrats are flying in immigrants to use them as voters, right? Just like the blatant lies he's telling to obviously appeal to different constituencies. And I think again, like I would say propaganda is a large threat to democracy and the powers of propaganda, and I wouldn't attribute that to the erosion of a nuclear family. I would attribute that to like, I mean, a time old trick that people in power have always used against those beneath them.
Sure. I would say I think a lot of people voted, at least in my circles, for instance, talking about the immigrant thing, uh, because of violent criminal immigrants coming in and gangbangers or whatever. And I
Exactly. And you
forget
would contribute that
the
to propaganda, right?
well, I would contribute higher crime rates to fatherless homes and ninety
Well, there
percent of
wasn't higher crime rates.
what do you higher crime rates than when?
Well, from when Joe Biden took office to when he left office, crime
Yeah,
rates dropped. So they were
remember I'm talking
dropping.
about the dissolution of the family. I'm not talking about when
I know,
Trump
but
came in office or when
yeah,
Biden
no,
came in
no, no.
office. So I'm
What
talking
I
about something like 80 years in the making, 80 years of stuff is what I'm discussing. And so I'm saying over the 80 last 100 years, 80 years, um, civil society has
I don't even know if
become
that's true because I think
weakened.
the murder rates have been dropping since the 90s. I'm almost positive the violent crime rates have been dropping since the 90s. I think they spiked again during COVID and then they've been dropping again since COVID.
Well,
I
I'm
would
not talking. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, so I just think that the reason, like, I don't think it's factually true, and I think that's the point you're making. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the reason people believe it is because propaganda is a powerful tool, not because the nuclear home is eroded.
You don't think what's factually true that crime has increased since for a date? Let's go with I forget the exact date. I'm going to say 60s is when
That's a
women entered
I don't
the
know as well from
workplace.
the 60s.
Is that
What
when did women in droves enter the workforce? Was that 60s,
60s or early
70s?
70s,
When
yeah.
the pill when was the pill? 70s, 60s?
Yeah. Hmm.
Okay, so let's use that time frame for a beginning. So you're saying you don't think from then till now crime has increased, social unrest has increased, divorce rates, single father or single homes, single parent households, any
Well,
of that?
those things have increased for various reasons.
And you
I
don't
don't
think those
know.
have any effect on society writ large?
Most of those, no. Divorce and stuff, no. No,
That's
not at all.
wild.
The crime rate, yes, but population adjusted. Now, I'm not a shirt from the 60s or 70s. Again, I don't know if it's went up or not, population adjusted, but I know from the 90s, violent crime was for the longest time on a steep decline, and then it spiked again during COVID. And I don't know if now we're under where we would have been at the 90s, but I know that we experienced a long period of drop in violent crimes. So like, and I don't know if that changes when you extend it to like the 70s, because I know like lead poisoning was a big thing in the 70s and 80s. And as they addressed that and things with like the crime bill and all of this, crime started to drop. But yeah, I don't know. But of the things you listed, yeah, I think crime is the only one that I would probably attribute to a worsened society. I don't see how divorce makes society worse.
Well, so divorce makes society worse because children of divorce are twice as likely to drop out from high school, which means they're twice as likely to not know things, twice as likely to not be able to get jobs, all those types of things. The mental health aspect of it. Oh, my parents broke up because of me. I'm the problem. Depression, suicide rates. Then they're suicidal. They're depressive. Maybe they'll, everybody's, they're going through a hard time, and maybe they're sick of the bully at school. Let me just buy a gun and go shoot up places. Let's go rob a
I
bank
don't
or
know
whatever.
how
And
much I
all
don't
of
know
this comes
how
from
much of that would
divorce.
be solved from just like eradicating, like to blame that on divorce. I feel like
So
you would
much of
have
it.
to then say like taking divorce away would make it better. Then it's just like, what about like women, like a kid who just watches his mom just get like mentally and emotionally abused every day or whatever it is, whatever the situation might be.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that would have.
They hear their parents screaming at the top of their lungs every day at each other. Like I think that there would be similar negative mental outcomes.
Absolutely, there would.
So it's like I would think
But
that
that doesn't.
I don't know if
That's
like I think it's just blaming. It's like seeing the forest before the trees or whatever. Like you're blaming divorce when the real reason there is more so like the rushing into relationships before you should probably, or marrying people or having kids with people before you should, which like again happens more in your worldview than mine because you want abortion banned and contraceptives banned and you want more of this to happen, which would lead to more of those outcomes.
And what would you say about not taking vows seriously, for instance, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse? As in, if my life is worse, I'm still supposed to stay. And people not understanding that when they get married. I would attribute more issues there than. So maybe you can call that rushing into it, if you want to say frame it that way. Um,
Yeah.
but I think that. Did you say yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I still think that. I mean, the stats are pretty jarring and pretty clear about divorced kids and how much more likely they are to be
Well,
incarcerated.
no, and I should clear
85.
that up. Yeah, I
So
should clear
that
that
leads
up.
to crime. Like it just straight up does.
I should clear it up. I'm not denying that divorce does have effects. I'm just talking as like I just think that a lot of the effects are attributed more so to the negative relationships than like divorce itself. And I think that like a lot of society could be structured in different ways to address those things better, especially for like single parent households and like a lot of the struggles they have to go through financially and stuff that then makes things like focusing on education harder. But I don't know how much of any of this comes from the erosion of the nuclear family. I feel like most of the points
Well,
you've made,
divorce that clearly does.
well, I mean, I guess if you want to like in a roundabout way, but I would think like, if you want to say like rushing into the nuclear family then erodes it, I could say
Well, I would say
sure.
no
People
fault
rushing into
divorce.
situations.
I would say no fault divorce does. I would say that's significant.
What's with
Look
you
at the
people with
numbers. I
no
want to
fault divorce? You guys just hate no fault divorce, don't you? All of religion
because it's
hate no
it's
fault divorce.
it's it's a complete spit in the face of what marriage is. There can be no fault divorce if you promise in sickness and in health, in better or richer for poor and for better for worse. So, oh, I wasn't happy
Marriage is a
anymore. Well,
social construct.
that fits with worse, doesn't it?
Marriage is a social construct.
That fits with worse, right?
Do you think marriage
Oh,
is a social construct?
I don't know what that means.
It
In
means it's
part,
constructed and only exists in society, constructed by and only exists in society. Or do you think marriage surpasses?
depending on depending on how you want to define
Like,
marriage,
do you think there's
yes
like a
or no.
spiritual foundation? I'm just curious. Like, is there like for
I
you,
think
like,
there's a biological, spiritual, and cultural or societal, whatever you want to call it. I think all three of those exist in marriage.
we might have
Like
to debate that
obviously,
one time too.
obviously there's the P and V, make kids.
That doesn't have
Clearly,
anything to
mom,
do with
dad.
marriage, though,
Well,
right?
mom, dad, baby. It's better for the baby if mom and dad stay together. It leads to better outcomes. So that's just inherently better to stay. Uh, Generally
That
speaking, and
doesn't have
then
anything to do with marriage, though.
I mean, it does. Mom and dad need
You
to
just
stick
not get
together.
married. You could not get married and have the same outcomes.
You can't. You can't
Okay,
because
what?
then the relate. That's a whole. Maybe we have to have a whole debate on marriage, but then no, because not being married is a very different. Being roommates is not the same thing as to raise your kids. It's not the same. But so there's that biological aspect, obviously.
If you're
Um,
partners and you're together and acting as parents and your parents also to the child, that's which is what encompasses a nuclear family. It's not marriage, has nothing to do with it. It's partnership and association with parenthood is what
I
delivers
mean, the
those outcomes.
partnership and the marriage, that's synonymous. So I'm
No,
not
marriage
sure.
is the social construct. It's what we as a society have deemed the best way to label partnership.
What's the partnership? So
What
okay, so that's just the label for the
it
partnership.
could
That's
just
what I'm
be
saying. That's
Well,
synonymous.
sure, but it's the societal label, right? It only exists in society. I don't think it trumps
But I
society.
don't.
I don't think
Why
marriage
does the
itself is
word matter?
biological. I don't
Why
know
does
what
the
you mean.
word matter? I don't understand how those are different.
Because the partnership is what gives you the benefits, right?
Yes, and that partnership is called marriage.
Well, no, but that partnership could exist without marriage. They could just be together
It can exist without. Well,
and they
then they're
could
not
date.
together.
They could date. Like, for instance, me and my girlfriend, right? We're not married. We live
Yeah, but you're not
together.
partners.
We live together. Well, with now it's just semantics. That's like what I mean. People in a relationship that aren't married, that are parents,
Yeah, they
could
have a
deliver
different
those same
relationship.
outcomes, but they could deliver
I
the
don't
same
think so.
outcomes.
I don't
I
think
mean, do you have
so.
any
Maybe
data
some of them would be
separate? I was
not
gonna say,
on me at the moment,
yeah, I
but
don't think there's data to support that.
I think there would be. I think it would be. There would be some pretty strong data, but I mean, I would have to look that up.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah,
prepare
no,
that
well,
specific
I feel like we've
minutia
crossed
thing.
into 6 topics we could do for different debates. So now we're at least locked and loaded for different episodes. Do you want to, because
Yeah,
we're getting over the
let me
hour
wrap
point.
up.
I would say
Yeah,
if you want to wrap up and then I can, and then take us out. So go ahead.
yeah. So essentially, what I'm saying is, for democracy to work, you have to have people who participate in it, and you have to have people who understand it, and you have to have people who believe in it. And I think that all those three things get undercut when the family and the foundation of society is disjointed. Even the very idea that I need to take care of other people um, who are in my neighborhood or community is family. That's family mindset right there. And that starts at home in the family. I need to take care of my sister because she's also here and living under this roof. And I got to do my chores and I got to, all of that starts at home when you're a kid. I think the stats are clear. Children of divorced parents are twice as likely to drop out of high school. 85% of the youth in prison come from fatherless homes or broken homes, divorced homes. Clearly, the worst people in society, if we want to call them that, come from bad home lives and situations. And when those people are involved at all levels of our society, it doesn't work out for anyone. Men who don't have emotional regulation, for instance, can cause all sorts of problems. I think lack of trust in institutions. Oh, my parents left, yada, yada, yada. Everyone's going to leave. How would I ever trust any of the presidents or our government? Everyone's going to leave me. Any mindset like that, all of that, that's basically my argument. Yeah.
Yeah, so my summary would be I think that you could maybe say the erosion of the nuclear family could be a threat to some things, some very niche things that I don't think are like mainstream concerns. I definitely don't think it's a threat to democracy. I think if anything, we've demonstrated that it wasn't. Like it's been a problem. Swal said it's been a problem for years. We've only seen higher and higher Democratic participation in our elections. 2020, for instance, was the largest, like we had the highest Democratic participation that we've ever had, the most people ever voted in that election. So like in terms of he's saying for a democracy to function, people have to take part. They obviously were still taking part prior to Donald Trump getting power, reining back information, censoring dissent, arresting Democrats. And I think that the threat that we see both from corporate money, from fascism, from bigotry, and from propaganda all outweigh any hypothetical concerns or critiques you could bring from the erosion of the nuclear family. Corporate money affects how politicians legislate. They can directly bribe our Supreme Court. This threatens how they let or rule on cases that affect your everyday democratic powers. Campaigns often are what win elections, at least in primaries, very much so. So if corporate money is swaying who comes out of the primary, that is suppressing your democratic power. Fascism, again, we kind of went through that in the debate. Bigotry as a whole stands to suppress minority groups and their democratic power. You have people who yell repeal the 19th Amendment. They don't want women to vote. That is a direct threat to women's democratic power. The same could be said about the LGBTQ community. And then propaganda, kind of also how we've walked through, people essentially believing in lies, people believing that there are violent immigrants crossing our border, that Democrats are shipping them in, that Democrats want to have third trimester abortions. I think all of these things threaten our democracy in not only uniquely different, but extremely more dangerous ways than the erosion of the nuclear family. But let us know who you agree with in the comments. It was a fun debate. We went through 6 topics or so that I'm sure we'll have in future debates. And then just to take us out, if you're on Substack, make sure you subscribe. We post these every week. There's articles, all kinds of things on the Substack. Look around and find them. If you're on YouTube, like and subscribe, leave us a comment. All of that helps us in the algorithm. If you're on Spotify, leave us a heart. If you're on any other platform, whatever it is that likes or leaves us in your playlist, do it there. We would really appreciate it. We're busting these episodes out each and every week on Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And until next time, peace.
Peace.